he was looking for a pair of stolen trousers. That is the part that stays with you, not a murder investigation, not years of careful detective work closing in on a dangerous man. A constable named William Gardner walked 2 miles through the April dark to search a stable on the grounds of a wealthy estate, because a pawnbroker in the high street was missing a pair of black trousers and wanted them back. He found something else entirely. Roehampton, Surrey in the spring of 1843 was not yet London. It sat to the southwest of the city, separated from the urban sprawl by open fields and the long drives of private estates. Pennington Lane ran through these grounds, wide, quiet-lined, with substantial properties. One of them belonged to a wealthy landowner named Aldous Crane. His estate included a house, outbuildings, and a stable block set at considerable distance from the main residence. That distance mattered. What happened in the stable at night was effectively invisible to the main house. The man responsible for the stable was a coachman named Silas Dowd, Irish-born, dark-complexioned, black-haired, notably bald at the crown, a detail that would prove consequential later. He had worked at the Crane estate for just over 2 years. The stable was his domain. His authority over it was a function of his professional role. What occurred within those walls after dark was in practice beyond anyone's observation. On the night of Wednesday, the 9th of April, Constable Gardner arrived at the estate with 2 assistants from the pawnbroker's shop. The stable was dark. Gardner searched by lamplight, moving through the stalls, the hay, the ordinary smell of horses and cold earth. His lamp caught something beneath a mound of hay. He thought initially it was a plucked goose. It was not a goose. It was the headless, limbless torso of a woman. At the moment Gardner made this discovery, Silas Dowd was present in the stable. He moved without hesitation, crossed the floor, passed through the stable. Door drew it shut behind him and locked it from the outside. 3 men stood in complete darkness in a locked-out building 2 miles from the nearest station, with a murdered woman at their feet. By the time they forced their way free and raised the alarm, Dowd was already gone. She kept a small notebook. Not a diary exactly, more a working record. Household accounts, names of reliable employers, a list of addresses in her own careful handwriting that witnesses later described as neat and deliberate, the writing of someone who had taught herself and was quietly proud of it. The notebook was found among her few possessions after her death. It was entered into the proceedings as an exhibit and noted briefly by the clerk. Then the record moves on, as records always do, to what the institution found more pressing. Her name was Margaret Price. The official record does not preserve her birthday, her birthplace, or the names of her parents. She enters the documented world in approximately November of 1840, when she took lodgings at a house in the Clerkenwell district of London, a building of the kind that housed domestic servants and the working poor, modest but not destitute. Beyond that address, the record offers almost nothing. Witnesses described her as a woman of full build, quiet in manner, dark-eyed. No further physical description survives. No documents relating to her origins or her life before Clerkenwell have been recovered. What is documented is her connection to Silas Dowd. Shortly after taking her lodgings, she entered into a domestic arrangement with him. The circumstances of how they met are not preserved, and within months had begun using his surname. She lived as Margaret Dowd for 3 years. This arrangement was not unusual. Legal marriage was expensive. The adoption of a partner's name carried social recognition, even without legal standing. What the record does not initially reveal, what would only emerge during the investigation, is that Dowd already had a legal wife. A woman known in the record only as Bridget, estranged, living in the east of the city. The marriage was a legal fact. Margaret Price could never have been his lawful wife, regardless of the name she used or the life she had carefully built. By early 1843, Dowd had turned his attention toward another woman. Her name was Susan Alcott, approximately 30 years old, residing with her family to the southeast of London. The trial record reflects that this had introduced a dangerous friction into his arrangement with Margaret. Some secondary accounts suggest Margaret may have been with child at the time of her death. This detail is contested rather than confirmed. What is established is this Easter Sunday, the 5th of April, 1843, was almost certainly the last day of her life. No witness documents her final hours. No statement attributed to her survives. She kept a small notebook. The record mentions it once, then it moves on. The alarm went out from Pennington Lane before midnight. 9 divisions of the Metropolitan Police were set in motion. Officers fanned outward from the Crane estate, working through the night and into the following days. What they were working with was almost nothing. The Metropolitan Police had been established only 14 years earlier. In 1843, it was still finding its form, roughly 4,000 uniformed constables, spread across a 15-mile circuit structured for the prevention of crime on the beat, not the pursuit of suspects across parish lines. There was no detective capacity, no plainclothes investigative apparatus, no mechanism for transmitting intelligence across the administrative boundaries that divided the district into its territorial divisions. The cultural resistance ran deeper than mere organization. The British public regarded plainclothes detective work with genuine suspicion, too close in the popular imagination to the surveillance methods of the French police tradition. When the Metropolitan Police had been established in 1829, part of the public reassurance had been explicit. Officers would work openly in uniform, on the beat, no covert inquiry, no continental methods. That reassurance now had consequences. Commissioner Thomas Vane called in Inspector Edmund Cross, the officer judged most capable for investigations of this nature. Cross brought senior direction to the pursuit. He could not manufacture structural capacity that did not exist. Dowd crossed the divisional boundary almost immediately, then he crossed the county line into Kent. At that point the Metropolitan Police had, in the words of the memorandum that would later be drafted in response to this failure, no means of getting immediate cognizance of him. The investigation had reached as far as its administrative structure permitted. Beyond that limit, there was nothing. Meanwhile, Dowd's description circulated through the press: 5 feet and 6 inches, dark complexion, long features, black hair, notably bald at the crown. The newly established Illustrated Courier published it with unusual prominence. 9 divisions, 1 man walking south and east with a head start. 10 days passed, he was still free. The newspapers were not kind about it. Dowd had adopted an alias. He was now James Farren. He traveled through several locations across southeast England, public houses, laboring camps, presenting himself as an itinerant worker between positions. He eventually found employment on a building site near a railway station in Kent, beyond the county boundary, beyond the reach of London entirely. He had been working that site for several days when the man beside him recognized his face. Not a detective, not an officer of any kind. A former constable who had previously served in the Western Division of the Metropolitan Police and who had sufficient knowledge of Dowd from that period to recognize him beneath the alias. The former constable informed Superintendent Henshaw of the Southeastern Railway Police. Henshaw arranged for Dowd to be brought to a nearby inn under the pretext of refreshment. Dowd accepted. He sat down by the fire. He removed his cap. The distinctive bald crown was visible. Henshaw arrested him. James Farren was set aside. The fugitive was Silas Dowd. 10 to 14 days of flight that had confounded 9 divisions of the Metropolitan Police ended through a chance encounter arranged not by a detective, because no detective existed, but by a former constable who happened to recognize a face on a building site in Kent. Dowd was returned to London. The medical examination had been conducted in the days immediately following Gardner's discovery. Dr. Samuel Corbett examined the torso the morning after it was found. His findings were precise, methodical, and deeply disturbing. The remains were headless, and limbless dismemberment had been carried out after death. The stomach had been opened. Evidence of attempted incineration was present, only partially successful, leaving the torso in a condition that permitted examination. The heart, Corbett testified, was in a healthy condition. It was entirely without blood. Death had occurred 3 to 4 days before his examination. Consistent with Easter Sunday. Consistent with the last day anyone had seen Margaret Price alive. A coroner's inquest returned a verdict of willful murder. Dowd was committed to the Old Bailey. He maintained throughout that he had not killed her. The trial opened in the May session of 1843. It did not last long, for bodies of evidence presented in sequence efficiently and without drama. The discovery, Gardner's testimony, the locked stable door, the 3 men enclosed in darkness. The domestic history, 3 years of Margaret's life, under the name Dowd, the estate, the arrival of Susan Alcott, the friction that followed. The medical testimony, Corbett, on the post-mortem dismemberment, the attempted burning, the bloodless heart, the absolute inconsistency of the findings with any explanation other than violence. The flight Deptford, the county line, James Farron, the building site, the bald crown, visible when the cap came off. The defense argued Margaret had taken her own life, that Susan Alcott's conduct had driven her to it. The jury retired contemporary accounts placed their deliberations at 35 minutes. Guilty. Dowd addressed the court at length. A sustained declaration, maintaining innocence, placing all responsibility on Alcott. It was reported in the press. It convinced no one. The judge donned the black cap, death by hanging. Silas Dowd was executed at Newgate Prison on the 26th of May, 1843. The crowd was large and hostile. They had followed the case for 7 weeks. They expressed their view directly. He was buried within the prison walls, and the criminal proceedings that had begun with the constables' lamp in a stable on Pennington Lane came to their legal conclusion. But the case did not end there. On the 16th of July, 1843, the police commissioners addressed a formal memorandum to the Home Secretary. It stated, in the flat language of administrative correspondence, that the force had, in the Dowd case, been unable to maintain effective pursuit of a suspect who crossed divisional boundaries because no mechanism existed for following him across them. It proposed a remedy to Detective Inspector's 8 detective sergeants, plainclothes, cross-divisional authority. The work, in short, that the Dowd case had proved could not be done by the existing structure. The formal orders appeared in August of 1843. Inspector Edmund Cross, who had led the failed pursuit, was appointed to head the new branch. He became the first chief of Scotland Yard's detective function. The branch grew. It became the Criminal Investigation Department, established in its modern form in 1878, operating without interruption to the present day. The institutional lineage connecting those first 8 plainclothes officers in 1843 to British criminal investigation, as it exists now, is unbroken. That lineage begins with a memorandum. The memorandum begins with a failure. The failure begins with a stable door locking shut in the April dark. And the stable door exists because of what was beneath the hay. Margaret Price does not appear in the institutional histories as a person. She appears as an occasion. Her birthplace is unknown. Her family is unknown. Her age at death is not established. Whether the remains that Dr. Corbett examined were ever interred anywhere is not documented in any source. Recovered, the record preserves her in 3 forms: only as a lodger at a Clockenwell address in 1840, as a woman who lived for 3 years under a name that was not legally hers, and as the charge in the proceedings against Silas Dowd, and as the owner of a small notebook, neat handwriting, careful columns, the addresses of reliable employers, mentioned once by a court clerk and never again. She was there. The record begins with her death and offers nothing before it. What came after her, the memorandum, the branch, the lineage, the institution that still operates today, none of it was for her. It was only ever because of her. The lamp was looking for stolen trousers. What it found changed British policing for 2 centuries. Margaret Price kept a small notebook. She did not know she was doing anything else.